Hey.
Hi.
Hello. Welcome back, Misfits, and welcome back to a new episode. Today, we're continuing the series called The Process.
Right.
Today, specifically, we're talking about how Abram became Abraham and the process that it took him to get to be the father of all nations.
Right.
Yeah. Abram's story starts in Genesis 11. We, of course, know Abram as Abraham, but for the sake of the story, we're going to call him Abram until his name gets changed in the actual chronological order that happens. When we meet Abram in Genesis 11, he's already married to Sarai, and they're living in an area called Haran, which, to get teachy, is an area in present-day Turkey. In Genesis 12, we start to see God moving in Abram's life. God tells Abram, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." The Bible tells us that once this happened, Abram went. He took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, and all their stuff, and they left for the land of Canaan.
Road trip.
Yeah, exactly. He's like, get in, guys, we're leaving.
Yeah.
You think he had like a station wagon?
He had like carts and stuff, you know. One of those U-Hauls that you clasp
you
on
attach,
to.
yeah.
He
Let's
definitely
go.
had one of those.
Throw the donkeys in, we're leaving.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in this part of the story, they're all traveling and a lot of stuff happens, but we recommend you read it for yourself because, of course, it is a long story.
There's a lot of detail in
yes,
there,
there's a lot of detail and it's important detail, but it's just, we read here forever.
Right.
Yes.
So we'll give you the highlights.
We'll give you the highlights. This is the highlight
deets.
reel. Exactly. Yeah. Read it for yourself. So at some point, they make it to Egypt and some drama ensued. There's a lot of drama across this whole story, but the drama starts here. So Abram tells his wife, he's like, "Hey, you're beautiful, and I think these men are going to try and kill me to get with you. If anyone asks, or if the king asks, just tell them that you're my sister." That's the story. We're sticking to it. So this whole plan completely backfires because, as suspected, someone did like her, and it was Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. So they take them both to the palace, and Abram is being treated well because of Sarai. But the Bible tells us, and this is quoted from the Bible, "The Lord inflicted serious diseases on Pharaoh and his household because of Abram's wife Sarai." This happens because Pharaoh was going to take Sarai to be his wife. However, of course, she was already married. He just didn't know that because Abram was like, "Hey, she's my sister. It's completely fine. I don't want to die. Yeah, you can take her." Which
he thought he was protecting her
or protecting himself.
Themselves.
It was a whole thing. So Pharaoh is like, "Oh yeah, I like her. I'm about to marry her." So Pharaoh calls Abram, and he somehow finds out that she's his wife, and he confronts Abram and basically says, "Why wouldn't you tell me?" The king is so mad. He basically just says, "Take her and go. Like, just get out of my palace, get out of my face.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not trying to suffer consequences because you lied to me."
Right. I think it's interesting to note this because, like, Pharaoh wasn't necessarily a believer of God, but he knew the power that God had, and he was like, "I'm not messing with you. Like, get out of here."
Yes, exactly. So he literally kicks him out of the palace.
Yeah.
And at this point, there's what we'll call like a side story thing going on between Abram and Lot. So if you remember, when God called Abram, he brought Lot with him. The Bible literally tells us he brought Lot with him. And Lot went with him. Like, that's literally what the Bible says. The area they were living in wasn't enough to sustain them both. They had so much cattle and possessions that the Bible says the land could not support both Abram and Lot with all their flocks and herds living so close together. And so this is when they separate. Continuing on with Abram's story, in chapter 15, God promises Abram he's going to have an heir. The Bible says Abram would have a son who is your own flesh and blood. He took him outside and said, "Look up at the sky and count the stars, if indeed you can count them." Then he said to him, "So shall your offspring be." So to get teachy, this is why he's going to be known as the father of the faith and the father of many nations.
Right.
After God promises him he will have many descendants, he says, "To your descendants I give this land, from the Wadi of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates, the land of the Kenites, the Kenizzites, Cadmonites, Hittites, Perizzites, Rephites, Amorites, Canaanites, Girgashites, and Jebusites."
Can you get an award for
I was
saying
like,
all those?
why would I choose that verse?
I would have just been like, ites,
And
ites,
all the people. But yeah, that's why
all the ites.
he's going to be known in the future once God changes his name and everything as the father of many nations. So here God is telling Abram what we already know, and it was God promising the people of Israel that the promised land of Canaan. This was a prophetic word from God to Abram about his future and what God was about to do through him.
Yeah, so after this moment that he has with God, of course, they continue on, and there's more drama that ensues because of his wife, Sarai. So Abram's wife is still not pregnant, and so this promise was given to them, right? And so she comes up with this idea and tells Abram to sleep with her servant Hagar. And so we don't get a lot of detail as far as Abram's involvement with that decision, but we do know that he does sleep with her.
Right.
And so he must have agreed. Regardless of how it happens, it happens. Hagar does get pregnant, and she does have a son, and they name him Ishmael. So you have to understand at this point, Abram is 86 years old. He's up there. And so he has the son and still waiting for that promise from God. So we fast forward, and Abram is now 99 years old, still waiting on that promised child because Ishmael was not it.
Yes.
There's a lot of stuff that happens in between that, but basically God's like, you need to have a son with Sarai.
Yes.
So fast forward, he's 99, and this is when God comes to him again, changes his name from Abram to Abraham, and he actually, at the same time, changes Sarai's name to Sarah. And then he tells him about circumcision and how that's a sign of the covenant between him and God. So all of this is just an emphasis on that promise of God that he had already made before, right? So he comes back to him and is like, I'm still going to bless you.
Yeah.
And here's like more proof, basically. Like, I'm changing your name, and I'm doing this covenant with you that includes circumcision now.
Right. Like, you're not who you used to be.
Right. Yeah. And letting him know, like, you will be the father of many nations. So just emphasizing that promise, which is what God does, right? Like, he wants us to know and trust that he's going to do it, you know?
Yeah.
So he's doing that with Abraham now that he changed his name. So then Abraham is in a new area at this point. He's between Kadesh and Shur, which from what we know, what we found out is what is modern day Egypt. And here there is another king, Abimelech, and this king likes Sarah too. And so Abraham again decides that this is a good idea to say, oh, it's my sister.
Because it worked out so well the first time. Like, why would you do that?
Like, let's repeat history.
Yeah. Did we not learn anything from the first time when they kicked us out of this kingdom and your wife got married to? Like,
yeah, like this close to marrying someone else and the whole thing. But he thinks, let's try it again. Again, he doesn't want to die or whatever. He's like thinking he's protecting himself, his wife. I don't know what his deal is, but he decides to go for it again, basically. But yeah. So God, again, intervenes and came to the king in a dream and was like, you need to stop because she's married. And so, of course, similar to what happened before, the king confronts Abraham and was like, why did you lie? Like, why would you lie? And Abraham said, well, I thought you were going to kill me because you wanted her. And so thanks to God, literally, he resolves that situation. He's in it. And then we can skip to how the promise is fulfilled. And Abraham and Sarah have their son, Isaac. So Abraham is about 100 years old when his son is born. We don't know exactly how old Sarah is, but we also know that she's quite old, maybe close to his age or something. And we know that because when she heard that God was going to give her a son, she laughed.
Right.
And that was one of her reasons, like, I'm old. Like, what do you mean I'm going to have a baby? So we know she was already old when she was given the promise, and this is years later, and then, so she's a little older. So she has the child, the promised child from God. So then we get to the part that many know. God tells Abraham to take Isaac and go up to the mountain to sacrifice him as a burnt offering. And when he gets there and he gets close to that happening, God intervenes again and provides that ram instead of Isaac to sacrifice. So just getting teachy here, this just shows us that Abraham has that obedience to God. He's been tested. He's been asked to give up basically the most important person in his life, and knowing that this is a promise and something that he's been waiting for so long. And despite all of that, he was still willing to give it to God and be obedient and said, basically, like, you gave him to me, you gave me this promise, like, I'm going to obey you and give him back to you.
Right,
Like,
right.
you will do what you need to do.
Yeah, because the Bible tells us, right, that as they're walking up, I think it's Isaac that asked him, like, hey, we don't have a lamb, we don't have a whatever.
Right.
And Abraham, all he says is, God will provide. Yeah.
Yeah. So he
He was
knows.
probably shaking in his boots, though.
No kidding. Like, I have to do this. I don't want to do it,
Yeah.
but I'm trusting God.
Exactly.
So then the Bible tells us that at age 127, Sarah dies. So, she was quite older. So, of course, Abraham mourns for her. And then later on, he does marry another woman named Keturah. And so with her, he had 6 more kids. So Abraham had a lot of kids in his older age.
Yes.
But yeah, so he has Isaac, he has Ishmael from before, and now these 6 with this new woman. He lives a good old age, right? He has all these children. He's an old man, full of years, and he lives to be 176 years old. And when he died, he left everything to his firstborn, Isaac. And of course, we know that because that was the promised son. This is what God said to do. Abraham
That's what Isaac
had to
was
do
there
it.
for. Yeah.
So that's what happens. So the Bible tells us that Abraham died at a good old age, an old man and full of years. Then both his sons, Isaac and Ishmael, buried him with Sarah. And that's the end of Abraham's story. Of course, there's a lot of detail we skipped. We're not going to go into everything that happened, but you understand where he came from as Abram and his initial promise from God and how God changed his name and what happened when that happened, and that whole promise from God.
Yeah, we touch on some monumental moments, but please know there is still a lot more to read about Abraham.
But we'll get a little teachy right now. The life of Abraham shows us a couple of things. So one, obedience to God is the key to unlocking everything he has for you. And we see it time and time again. Like, Abraham does mess up. You're going to see that. I mean, I think Ishmael was one of those where they got ahead of God, and you'd think like, oh man, like he really screwed it up. But God kept his promise.
Yeah.
Like, Abraham was like, okay, I messed up. I went and tried to do it on my own, but then he stayed faithful.
Yes.
And so we see that, I mean, we're human and that happens to us as well. But as long as we're still obedient and we come back to God and keep trusting him, like, he's going to keep being with us.
Yeah, because even I feel like there's interesting moments, and well, his whole story is interesting,
Yes.
but particularly when he goes to these kings, right, and he lies about his wife, and it's God is still there to be like, okay, let me intervene because apparently you don't know what you're doing.
Right,
you know what I mean? Like,
right.
let me help you. And it's just like, wow. And he went through the experience the first time with Pharaoh.
Yes.
And then it doesn't work out. God saves him. And then for some
It's like he
reason,
forgot.
he's like, yeah, let me try this again. Because that's what we do.
But that's
right?
what we do.
Forget.
Exactly.
Yeah,
or we
forget.
think like, oh, it'll work.
It'll
this
be
time.
different this time. Yeah. And
And
it's interesting for me to think that potentially when God saved him, that he just didn't know.
And I feel like that's so us as well. Like,
Definitely.
we try to do that all the time.
Definitely.
Like we learn, but then somehow we forget, and then we do it again.
Yeah.
And then God's like, nope. And we're like, okay, I got you.
Yeah.
We'll do it again.
Okay.
2, so when God sends you, don't take Lot with you. We didn't go into too much detail, but we can see that when he took him, it just made more chaos for him.
Yes.
And just created more situations where at the end they had to just split up anyway.
Right. So it was probably a situation where if you read the story, it'll literally say like, God called Abraham and then Lot went with him. So God didn't call Lot, right?
Right, yeah.
Lot just was already there. And he's like, he's part of my family. Lot is his nephew. He's like, yeah, let's roll.
I might need
all
help.
of us together. Yeah, let's go.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because Lot gets blessed because of Abram, like
for
because
sure,
of Abraham and
yeah.
the proximity that he had. So that's amazing. But he was never supposed to be there. And like you said, it just caused more trouble. At some point, Lot, when they do separate, Lot goes to Sodom, right?
Yeah.
And then he has to go rescue him because he got in trouble because he was living in a city he had.
'Cause there's a whole other
he had no
issue there.
business living. Yeah, so it's like a whole. It was just so complicated. So like, you just got to make sure that if God calls you, just don't take Lot with you.
You have a call in your life. It's for you. That doesn't mean it's for the people around you necessarily. Nor do you have the authority to like be like, hey, you're also getting blessed. Come on over. Be like, no. They have their own blessing. God's gonna call them for something else. But if God's calling you, don't try to take it upon yourself to involve others, bring others.
Because we know that God is intentional of separating you from certain people in certain seasons and stuff like that. And maybe this was it.
Yeah,
You know,
for sure.
And he's like, hey, He's calling all of us. Let's go.
Yeah.
We're leaving.
Let's keep going. You need to leave
because
behind.
even though they separated, they didn't separate because it was negative. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
they
for
were
sure.
too blessed and they had to separate, which is just an interesting picture of like, it wasn't that things were going wrong, really. It's like, hey, you have too much money and I have too much money. You got to go somewhere else. You're ruining the economy.
And there, you know,
we gotta
God even used that. Like, hey, it's a positive thing, but I still need you to
I need
from
to
him.
split up. Yeah.
There's more things coming.
Lot gets his own spin-off series later.
Like Frasier.
Yeah, exactly. I hope people understood that reference.
We're old. So 3, Abraham's insecurity jeopardized his marriage. So like we touched on, there were 2 instances where he lied about who Sarah was, and because he thought, I don't want them to kill me, kill her, the whole thing. So instead of being able to cover his wife, instead he decided, like, I'll just lie about her and that'll fix the situation. And of course, this led to these men almost marrying her and then creating, all these issues. And of course, I'm sure there was trust issues, resentment, no attention, maybe even like in this marriage, thinking like that.
These are
I don't
the
want to be
moments that we needed the Book of Sarah. You know what I mean? I need to know, how
we
did
need
you
her
handle it,
version.
Sarah? Exactly. How mad were you? Because I'm sure you was mad. So it would have been so interesting. But yes, it's definitely, you can tell that he was dealing with some sort of insecurity or, just fear of not wanting to die. And that just shows his humanity. Because he wasn't trusting God. You know what I mean? He wasn't like, we're going to be fine. It was just like, okay, this is the plan. We're going to lie.
And it's going to be fine.
Yeah, we're going to be great.
We can relate. And 4, it doesn't matter how old you are. If you're not dead, then God is not done. He can still use you. Understand that you still have a purpose. You can still birth things, new things, promises, blessings, whatever it is. Like, God can give you something and make it new in your life, no matter like where you are or how many times you've messed up. There's still a purpose. There's still things that God wants you to do.
Yep. If you're still here, you still have a purpose. He still has plans for you. You can be Abraham and you can be Sarah and you can be popping out babies and popping out businesses and popping out degrees, and he can definitely still use you, and you definitely still have stuff to do on this earth. So that's the end of the episode. I hope you enjoyed it. We hope you learned something about Abram/Abraham today, about his story. We hope that this motivates you to read the story for yourself. Yeah. And we just hope you learned about how, of course, obedience will just get you through the doors that God needs you to get through. But there's also something to be said about, of course, being human and owning up to your situation and just dealing with the issues that you have. And
just not forgetting that promise of God.
Yeah. So we hope you enjoyed this episode. We hope it provided value to you. We will be back next week with another episode. As always, this is Fran.
This is Yadi.
We are the Midtown Misfits, and we will see you next week. Bye.
Peace.